In a quiet black suburb outside Raleigh, North Carolina, Miss Vernetta has led the MT Glory Community Choir for 28 years. Widowed young, she raised 2 sons and earned respect as the heart of the neighborhood. But when a drought drains a forgotten creek bed, children stumble across human bones tangled in choir robes. Detective Elijah Brooks, a demoted city investigator, now stuck with suburban noise complaints, is reluctantly pulled in. The bones match a missing case from 1996, one the system quietly buried. As Brooks peels back the town's pristine image, he discovers secrets buried beneath gospel music, PTA potlucks, and Sunday greetings. Miss Vernetta isn't just the choir director. She was the last person seen with the missing man. And she's not the only one hiding something. Betrayals ripple through church pews and manicured lawns as guilt, loyalty, and black Southern pride collide. What started as a dried-up creek could expose a decades-old crime and destroy the town's most beloved figure. Before we uncover today's case, a quick reminder. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single clue, twist, or breakthrough in the stories to come. Now, let's dive into the case. The heat had a way of making everything feel louder. Cicadas buzzed like short circuits in the oaks behind Me Glory Baptist Church, and even the wind carried a tired, angry rasp as it moved through the cracked yards of Linwood Crossing. It hadn't rained in nearly 5 weeks, and the water levels behind Otis Creek had dropped so low you could see soda cans from the 90s rusting beside cattails. The kids, out of school early for the summer, turned the dried-up trail behind the church into a makeshift jungle gym, stepping on exposed roots and poking frogs with sticks. That's when Ava James screamed, loud enough for her older brother to drop his phone mid-TikTok, loud enough for old Miss Mabel to hear from her back porch and call 911 without asking questions. Because what Ava found wasn't a frog. It was a skull. Small, brown, with a narrow crack running across the crown like it had been pressed down hard, once. By the time Detective Elijah Brooks pulled up, 2 squad cars already flanked the yellow tape, and half the neighborhood had gathered with lawn chairs, like it was a barbecue instead of a crime scene. He stepped out slowly, sunglasses on, sleeves rolled. This wasn't his kind of case. He hadn't touched anything resembling homicide in 2 years. Not since the city benched him after the incident downtown. Linwood was supposed to be his rehab, quiet, polite, church-going. No bodies, no noise. Detective Brooks? A young officer said, face pale as boiled milk. You're going to want to see this. Brooks ducked under the tape and followed the trail of nervous whispers to the edge of the creek bed. The skeleton was halfway sunk in mud, wrapped in what looked like a faded choir robe, maroon and gold trim. A small enamel pin glinted on the chest. MT, Glory Voices of Praise. Brooks crouched. Something felt off, not just the robe. The placement. The bones hadn't washed there. They were arranged, laid down, tucked in, like someone gave the dead a bed. He glanced up at the ridge above the creek, where MT. Glory stood like a proud mother, its brick frame catching the sun. And beside it, the modest gray clapboard house with the white rocking chair and flower beds, Miss Vernetta's. The voice behind him made him turn. I'm sorry, is that a choir robe? Brooks turned to find her standing just beyond the tape, her lace gloves in one hand, purse in the other. Still in her Sunday best, even on a Tuesday. Her eyes narrowed as she recognized the color. Miss Vernetta, beloved choir director, organizer of the Juneteenth Bake-Off. The woman who knew everyone's secrets and kept them. Brooks nodded once. Ma'am, I'll need you to stay right there. Her lips pressed tight. Then she tilted her head, voice calm but sharp as sugar glass. Detective, I've seen that robe before, but the man it belonged to. He's been gone a long, long time. Brooks studied her. How long we talking? She gave a sad little smile. Since Bill Clinton's first term. Later that day, N.T. Glory Baptist Church Fellowship Hall. The congregation hadn't gathered like this on a weekday in years, not since Deacon Larry collapsed during the turkey giveaway. But today, everyone showed up. Detective Brooks stood at the back, watching as whispers pinballed from pew to pew. The pastor offered a prayer for the deceased, whomever they may be. But folks already had a name in mind. Darius Lattimore. He was the youngest choir member back in '96. Sang tenor. Played keyboard. Rumored to be too soft for the brothers and too bold for the sisters. One day he just stopped coming. Folks said he left town. Some said he ran off with a man to Charlotte. Others claimed he got into something he shouldn't. No police report was ever filed. His mama moved out the next year, and Miss Vernetta? She kept the choir going like clockwork. Brooks leaned against the doorframe, watching her now. Her hands were clasped neatly in her lap, eyes straight ahead. Not crying, not flinching, like she knew how to wait. That night, Linwood Crossing, Vernetta's house. Brooks parked under the street lamp and walked up the driveway slow. Porch light was on. She was waiting, tea in hand, seat ready. He didn't knock. "You kept the robe," he said softly as he stepped onto the porch. She looked at him with that same unreadable calm. "I kept a lot of things, Detective. This neighborhood loves to forget." Brooks took the seat across from her. "I'm reopening a case that was never opened," he said. Her voice was gentle. "Then you best know what you're walking into." Detective Elia Brooks couldn't sleep that night. The image of that choir robe, clinging to a skeleton like Second, skin haunted him worse than anything he'd seen downtown, and he'd seen some things. But there was something different about this one. Something colder, personal. At 6:12 a.m., before the sun had burned off the night haze over Linwood Crossing, Brooks was already at the County Records Building, trying to find a trail that no one ever meant to follow. The cold case office was buried 2 floors below street level, where the lights buzzed a little too loudly and the air smelled like wet paper. Most of the files were still analog. No fancy databases, just manila folders, dust, and silence. He pulled the church registry logs from 1995 to 1997. MT. Glory was meticulous. Every baptism, every donation, every choir rehearsal, logged like scripture. But when he turned to October 1996, there was a gap. One week, the choir roster listed D. Lattimore, tenor. The next week, his name was scratched out in thick black ink. No explanation. No withdrawal form. No exit letter. Just gone. Brooks frowned. Something didn't add up. That same day, someone made a large, anonymous cash donation. $5,000. Not from any known congregation member. And not repeated before or after. He slipped the page into a plastic sleeve and headed to county archives. If someone had filed a report off the record, it might have gone through the back channels, the old way. Back before digital. He stopped at the front desk, where an older white clerk named Diane chewed gum like she'd been waiting 30 years for someone to need something interesting. "You said Lattimore?" she asked, squinting through her readers. "Darius Lattimore. Linwood Crossing. Disappeared 96 or 97. She tapped her keyboard, then paused. "Not finding any criminal case or missing persons. You sure he didn't just move?" Brooks hesitated. What about complaints tied to MT Glory? Noise, parking, any anonymous tips? Diane rolled her eyes. "Baby, that church is older than my hips. They practically got immunity in this town." Brooks gave a dry smile. What about a police officer named Reuben Hollins? He was active back then. "I think he covered Linwood." Diane perked up at the name. "Reuben? Oh yeah, I remember him. Retired early." Said something about his blood pressure and the Lord's calling. Lives out near Riverbend now. Brooks jotted it down. Time to make a house call. Later that morning, Riverbend Mobile Estates. The mobile home was surrounded by plastic pink flamingos and a "Don't Tread on Me" flag drooping in the still air. Brooks knocked twice. The man who opened the door had a deep gut and a deeper stare. Gray hair, long robe, pistol holstered at the hip, like he was still on patrol. "You Elijah Brooks?" he asked without greeting. Brooks nodded. "I ain't got much to say about Linwood," Hollins grumbled, "but I figured someone come sniffing eventually." They sat outside under the awning. Hollins lit a cigarette, hands shaking just slightly. "You know a boy named Darius Lattimore went missing," Brooks said quietly. Hollins exhaled smoke. "I know he sang like an angel, and he dressed like he didn't give a damn who had a problem with it." Brooks waited. Hollins stared off into the trees. One night, late October, his mama came by the station, crying. Said he hadn't come home after choir practice. Said she heard shouting outside the church. "You file a report?" Hollins shook his head. "I tried. But Reverend Thomas came down the next morning. Said the boy ran off. Claimed he'd been acting troubled. Said they preyed on it. Said his mama was just upset and making things up. Next thing I knew, her house was up for sale and she was gone." Brooks clenched his jaw. "You believe the Reverend?" Hollins looked down at his hands. "Son, back then, in that town, Reverend Thomas was law, politics, and God rolled into one. If you crossed him, you didn't just lose your job. You lost your peace." Brooks stood slowly. "You still got your badge?" he asked. Hollins grunted. "In the junk drawer next to the bottle. I pretend not to drink." "You might need it again," Brooks said, already walking. At evening, MT, Glory Baptist, choir room. The piano keys hadn't been touched in a week. Miss Vernetta canceled rehearsals, which folks said had never happened in 28 years, not even during the ice storm of '02. Brooks slipped inside, glancing over the empty music stands. On the far wall, choir photos lined the room like a yearbook, going back to the '80s. He walked past smiling teenagers, velvet robes, award plaques. Then he saw it. A framed photo from 1996. The full choir, third row. Darius Lattimore, wide smile, gold-trimmed robe. Next to him, an arm draped over his shoulder casually. Not Miss Vernetta, not another student. The Reverend. Thomas Joyner. Eyes kind, smile faint. But Brooks had seen that posture before. Possessive, not brotherly. And someone had tried to peel the photo from the frame recently. The edge was torn, the backing taped down hastily. Brooks looked up, suddenly aware he wasn't alone. Miss Vernetta stood in the doorway, watching him. "You ever hear of the name Marcus Kane?" he asked quietly, still staring at the photo. She didn't move. "That was the name on the donation slip the week Darius vanished. The one you said you didn't recognize." Miss Vernetta stepped forward slowly, voice softer than before. "That name don't belong to one man, detective. It belonged to the thing we all let live inside that church." She walked to the photo, ran a hand gently over the glass. "You keep digging. You better be ready. 'Cause the truth's not just gonna crack this town. It'll crack what folks believe they were saved from." Brooks didn't answer. But in his mind, he saw the dried creek again, and the bed the bones had been tucked into. Someone didn't just hide the boy. Someone tried to bury the sin. The sanctuary was empty that Wednesday morning. Brooks waited until the janitor locked up and left. He moved quietly across the hardwood floor of MT Glory, his footsteps swallowed by the thick red carpet that lined the center aisle. Sunlight filtered in through the stained glass windows, tinting his skin in fractured colors, purple, blue, and gold. Up ahead stood the pulpit, and just beside it, the vintage organ Vernetta used every Sunday. He walked up to it. There was something about that bench, the way it sat ever so slightly crooked. He knelt and slid his hand underneath. A panel was loose. Behind it, tucked inside a cloth pouch, he found it. An old microcassette tape. Yellowed label. Scribbled initials. D.L. October 21st, 96. He slipped it into his pocket. Back at the station, Evidence Room B. Brooks borrowed the microcassette player from storage. Dust flew when he opened it. He pressed play. The hiss of silence. In a voice, soft, nervous, barely a whisper. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. I know what Reverend Joyner's been doing, and I'm not the only one. But they won't believe me. He said I belonged to him, that God wouldn't forgive me unless I... Click. The rest of the tape was blank, recorded over, or maybe cut off. Brooks sat back, stunned. This wasn't gossip. This was a warning. One Darius never got the chance to finish. He stared at the machine, jaw clenched. Reverend Joyner had preached at MT Glory for over 3 decades. Community leader, mentor, local radio personality. But that voice on the tape told another story, the kind buried under scripture and silk robes. That evening, Reverend Joyner's estate. Brooks pulled up to the white brick house nestled behind manicured hedges on church-owned land. The porch lights were already on. Reverend Thomas Joyner opened the door in slacks and a cardigan, eyes tired but smiling. "Alea Brooks," he said smoothly. "I was wondering when you'd come. You were expecting me?" Joyner chuckled. "I've been around long enough to know when old ghosts start walking." He stepped aside. The living room smelled of cedar and lemon oil. Family photos lined the mantel. Baptisms, weddings, charity galas. Brooks stayed standing. "I'm reopening the case of Darius Lattimore." Joyner's smile faded. "There was never a case, son." "There is now," Brooks said, pulling out the tape recorder. He pressed play. As the voice played, Darius's voice, the Reverend remained still, except for a twitch in his jaw. When the tape clicked off, Brooks leaned forward. "Was it true?" Joyner exhaled through his nose. "I loved that boy," he said finally, "but not how they whispered. I tried to save him from himself. He was confused." "Confused?" "He was scared," Brooks said. "He recorded this because he thought you'd hurt him." Joyner's gaze turned cold. "You think you're the first one to come here with questions? Linwood don't want the truth. Never did. They want peace, quiet, clean church lawns, and good music on Sundays." Brooks narrowed his eyes. "What happened that night?" Joyner stood, slowly. "I gave him a choice," he said. "Leave town or be cast out. He chose to run. Whatever happened after wasn't mine." Brooks stood too. "But you knew. You knew he never made it out." Joyner said nothing, but something flickered in his expression. A flash of guilt or pride. Later that night, Miss Fernetta's house. Brooks replayed the tape on her back porch. She sat in silence as Darius's voice poured out of the tiny speaker, her eyes glassy, hands pressed together like she was in prayer. When it ended, she didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, "He gave me that tape the night he disappeared." Brooks looked at her. "You didn't turn it in?" "I was going to. I swear it," she whispered. "But the Reverend came to my door that same night," Darius had confessed. "Said he was sorry for causing trouble, and that he was leaving with his uncle to Atlanta. Did you believe him?" She shook her head. "I wanted to, but something about his eyes, they were dry. Like someone who'd already buried the truth." She stood and walked to an old cabinet inside her house, returning with a weathered leather journal. He wrote things. About the Reverend, about the deacons, about the church using boys like him as scapegoats, silencing them, making them feel like sin. I hid it. thinking it would keep him safe. Brooks opened the journal. Page after page of trembling script. Songs, confessions, warnings. A list of names. And one name circled 3 times. Deacon Marshall Lee. The next morning, Deacon Marshall's auto garage. It looked like nothing more than a dusty repair shop off the state road. Grease-stained concrete, chipped paint, a broken Coke machine. Brooks parked out back and waited until the other mechanics left. Then he walked in. "Deacon Marshall?" he called. The man in coveralls looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. He was in his late 60s now, graying hair, strong frame. He nodded slowly, recognizing the badge. "I figured this was coming," he muttered. "You were on the board in '96, head of security for the church, and the last one seen locking the building the night Darius vanished." Marshall didn't deny it. "I did what I was told," he said after a beat. "We all did." "Told by who?" Brooks pressed. The man didn't answer, but his hand trembled. And that's when Brooks saw it, a pale scar across the knuckles of his right hand, shaped like a crescent. Darius's journal mentioned it. One of them had a scar, like a half moon, from punching the pulpit the night they cornered me. Brooks stepped forward. "You helped cover it up, didn't you?" "You knew." Marshall's shoulders slumped. "I dug the hole," he said, voice barely audible. "I didn't kill him, but I buried what was left." Brooks's heart pounded. "Who else was there?" Marshall closed his eyes and whispered the name that would burn everything down. It didn't take long for the story to start unraveling. The moment Marshall Lee's confession was filed, Detective Elia Brooks was granted an official warrant to search the private offices of Mt. Glory Baptist. With it came the reluctant cooperation of city officials, some of whom had sung in that very choir once, some who still tithed with their heads down and eyes closed. Inside a locked drawer of Reverend Joyner's office desk, they found the church's original incident report, unsigned, undated, and never submitted to law enforcement. It referenced a disciplinary conversation with Darius Lattimore and mentioned behavior unbecoming of church standards. There was no mention of a disappearance, no note of injury, just hollow scripture and carefully chosen words. But deeper in the drawer, behind crumbling bulletins and empty tithe envelopes, Brooks found a second journal. This one wasn't Darius's, it was the Reverend's. And on page 34, written in elegant, precise penmanship, were the names of 4 boys, all under 18, all members of the choir. All vanished from Linwood Crossing within a 3-year span. None officially reported missing. 2 had living mothers. 1 had died by overdose in 2002. The last, Darius, had finally been found. The following Sunday, Mount Glory Baptist Church. They came in their Sunday best. Pressed suits, floral dresses, fresh curls and bowed heads. But they didn't come for praise. They came for answers. The sanctuary filled to the edges, standing room only, as whispers trembled across the pews. Word had spread faster than the Reverend's gospel ever did. The tape, the journal, the bones, and the names. Elia Brooks stood near the rear wall, a quiet presence in plain clothes. And when Reverend Joyner stepped to the pulpit for the first time in 3 decades, no one clapped. His voice was steady as he opened his Bible. "Before we begin today, I want to." "We ain't here for scripture," someone said. A voice from the back. Miss Vernetta stood. She stepped into the center aisle. "You owe us the truth," she said. Joyner's mouth opened, but no sound came. Another voice rose, Mrs. Hargrove, who taught 3rd grade Sunday school. "My nephew went missing in '95. Y'all told us he joined the military, but he hated the military." Then Deacon Harold stood. "You told me I was mistaken, that I imagined the things I saw. But I didn't. It was no longer a congregation. It was a courtroom, a reckoning." Brooks watched as Reverend Joyner's shoulders slumped. As his hand gripped the pulpit so tight, the veins bulged. He looked out over the sea of betrayed faces. For the first time, he looked afraid. "I did what I thought was righteous," he whispered. "You buried children," someone shouted. 2 days later, Linwood Police Department. Reverend Thomas Joyner was taken into custody. He was charged with obstruction of justice, abuse of minors, and conspiracy in connection to the disappearance and death of Darius Lattimore. Marshal Lee, already in custody, agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence and gave the exact location of another burial site near the old choir retreat property. The remains of one of the other missing boys were recovered, and for the first time, their names, full names, were read aloud. No more whispers, no more lies. 1 week later, memorial service at Otis Creek. They gathered beneath the trees. No stained glass, no pulpit, just folding chairs, gospel humming low through a Bluetooth speaker, and photos clipped to a rope between branches. Darius's photo, young, bright-eyed, robe-pressed, smile wide, hung at the center. Miss Vernetta spoke first. "I thought I was protecting him by staying quiet. But silence never saved anybody. All it ever did was protect the wrong folks." Darius's mother, Gloria Lattimore, placed a single gold pin in the soil beside the creek bed. "I wasn't crazy," she said softly, voice breaking. "They told me I was grieving wrong, but I knew." Brooks stood off to the side, hands folded in front of him. He hadn't come to be seen. But when Vernetta called him forward, he stepped into the center. She placed Darius's old hymn book in his hands. "Find the others," she whispered. 3 months later, Raleigh Office of Special Investigations. Detective Elijah Brooks pinned 4 new photos to the corkboard in his small, quiet office. They were all faces of boys who had disappeared under the same shadows. Choir members, churchgoers, believers. He wrote one phrase across the top in bold marker: "Not forgotten." And beneath it, he pinned the journal page with the circled names. Because sometimes justice didn't come with a gavel. Sometimes it came with a tape recorder, a torn ledger, and a woman who sang through her grief. The truth was never buried deep. It just needed someone to dig with open eyes. Some stories don't end with a verdict. They echo in quiet rooms, in broken trust, in lives forever altered. This wasn't just a case file. It was a warning about what happens when fear replaces facts, when systems protect themselves, and when good people look away because it's easier. What happened here could happen anywhere, because injustice doesn't need a reason, just an opening. So if this story reached you, don't let it vanish. Speak up. Share it. Start the ripple. Because every time we shine a light, we take power from the shadows. And maybe, just maybe, the next story won't end the same. Like, comment, share. Let your voice join the case.